We'll go like that. Share. And how's that? Can you see? Great. Okay, we got a minute. Let's just see. It'll be great if a baby joins. Very exciting.
Oh, she's going to. It's going to happen. Hopefully
Because
she'll be a little bit quieter than this.
I mean, that was part of the process of last year, right?
Well, I mean, the creating of her.
Yeah,
The growing of her.
the growing.
I was pregnant during this whole thing. She was born in April, for anyone who doesn't know me. Thank you. Yeah, so she was born right after Pesach. She was 2 weeks late. She was supposed to be born Seder night. Thankfully, she was not. Mostly thankful that I didn't have to deal with kosher Pesach hospital food, which sounded like the worst thing possible. I did have visions of going into labor at Seder when we were hosting 12 people. That did occur. Come on, baby one. Hello. You want to say hi to everyone?
No.
You're more interesting. This is Ellie. Say hi. She has to go to sleep.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Joining us for the presentation.
She is joining us. Hopefully, she likes to be corporate, baby. But that has nothing to do with this or Parshat Mishpatim. So I'll just talk briefly, and if people have questions or comments, please chime in. So it's interesting because I actually totally forgot what I wrote about Parshat Mishpatim, because it feels like it was decades ago. Not only because of all the life changes, but January was a really long time ago, just in general. So yeah, so that was very interesting. And working with Beverly, we were working under this idea of how to bring Mishpatim into a conversation that is not just about laws, right? Because it's really just a book, a list of laws. But what is it trying to teach us? You can see there Beverly's amazing artwork. It's print with gold as she does printmaking, which is gorgeously done. She can speak about it more beautifully. She does have a website. If you Google her, you'll be able to find her work and about her process. But I was thinking about how we're meant to be creating and keeping a just and civil society, that there's so much within the Parsha which talks about how actually we're supposed to be not helping, that we are helping those who are our enemy. We're commanded to make sure that our enemy's donkey gets returned, and we're commanded that in addition to our friends donkey. And what does that mean for our relationships to those who we see as our enemy, and how can we be reaching out to actually go about what we're doing? And if I remember correctly, there was a Rabbi Sachs quote. I'm going to pull it up. Yeah. Here. So Rabbi Sachs says, in effect, your enemy is also a human being. Hostility may divide you, but there is something deeper that connects you. The covenant of human solidarity, distress, difficulties, these things transcend the language of difference. A decent society will be one in which enemies do not allow their rancor or animosity to prevent them from coming to one another's assistance when they need help. And I think that's really, what we can be learning from such a parsha, and thinking about what does it teach us in the everyday. And actually, all the more so, another quote from Dina Weiss, who's also an amazing educator. The purpose of the Torah is to make you more vigilant about your actions, more concerned about preventing the harm that you do to others than extracting the revenge from those who do harm to you. Parshat Mishpatim is not a collection of cases about oxen, thieves, and dangerous pits. It's about you. It's a reflection of your own ability to cause harm and a collection of the myriad of ways in which you do so. Reading this parsha should fill our hearts with dread and awareness of our capacity to be agents of destruction. Studying this parsha should strengthen our commitments to be vigilant, cautious, generous, and kind. And so thinking back to Mishpatim, I really do hope that myself, all of us, it's nice to remember these reflections of how to rehumanize the people we're interacting with, even those we might see as our enemy. And also remember how much we are not only able to, create, but also hurt, and then also fix those hurts. Does anyone have any other comments or questions or?
That's a really beautiful reflection. And there's a text of the piece description that Beverly wrote, that I'm happy to read, just to give her voice, put it in the mix. Please. And also based off of what you said, just how do we look at the enemy? This is a synagogue that she drew that was based off of a synagogue that was destroyed in the Holocaust, I believe. So just an interesting thing to think about, how we think of ourselves at different points in history, too, based off of what you just said. So this is very poetic, and this are her words. Framed within the rounded tablets of the darkened, weathered stones, light surges through the cracked windows, capturing the spirit of the synagogue through its Jewish laws. The murmuring of communal prayer combines belief and commitment within this holy space and beyond. In Mishpatim, God speaks about ethics, humanity, and obligations of man towards his fellow men, servants, workers, and animals that serve him. In discussion with Rabbi Aaron London, we stretch to move to more modern concepts, applying empathy to others less fortunate than ourselves, to demonstrating generosity, kindness, and charity to those around us. Mishpatim this year falls on International Holocaust Week, an evil chapter in Jewish history where society ignored justice and humanity. It was for this reason I chose a neglected and dilapidated synagogue linked with the Holocaust. Within these crumbling ruins, the spirit of Judaism survived, overcoming evil intent. This etching started with a flawless, shiny metal plate of perfection and optimism. The surface, with time, becomes scratched, and the lines are corroded by acids. Out of this destruction, a new, stronger image is formed. Encasing this moment of devoted prayer are symbols of the ancient reminders of humility. In Mishpatim, a foundation of laws to protect the vulnerable breaks the chains of hardship and the importance for justice to overcome corruption and prejudices. Those are some powerful words, and also some insight into this piece and into the collaboration that you had together.
Yeah, very much so. It is a beautiful work. And if you've seen other work of Beverly Jane, this is she had a whole exhibit of work that was specifically in dilapidated, ruined, destroyed, recreated synagogues in Eastern Europe. It's a anyways, Holocaust Remembrance Day last 2022. That's not this year. So if anyone's looking in their calendar, it might still be Pekude this year, but it's not, can't promise anything. Does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts that they want to share about anything you heard or thought about? Or if you heard us speak way back when in January that you are still mulling over?
I think it's a beautiful piece. I remember it from last January, and I remember her speaking about it. The part that I have the hardest time with, and this is just my own problem, is the fact that the windows were broken, and it seemed that the synagogues were almost bare, and it seemed that she had gone to places that were completely destroyed, not completely destroyed, but almost completely destroyed. But the show she had, I believe, was in Israel. Is that right?
She had one in Israel, and I think there was a show in another country, but I don't remember, and I'm not gonna speak for her.
And the part that I was taken when she showed it was the windows being like the tablets, being like the Luchot, and the scales on either side sort of echo the windows turned upside down. There's something about it. I mean, I myself have issues with forgiving and forgetting and how to bring that into our lives and the history, but there's something that she was able to put together in this. I don't know that there was any answer to this, but I think there was something where she was able to put the scales of justice, the equal scales, and them into the windows. So I thought that was really beautiful. I think she did a beautiful job with this piece. I was really impressed when she spoke, right? I mean, when you both spoke, actually. Yeah, so that's what I got from it. It's nice. I forgot her name. It's nice that I came to this room and you guys are in this, so it's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, please Google her art, Beverly Jane Stewart. You can find her artwork. It's very beautiful and very moving. So I'll put a plug for her work, and it was a pleasure to be able to work with her on this.
And the people on the bottom, these are people who were enslaved. Is that?
I think, yeah. Well, I think it's the slave. So the beginning of Mishpatim is talking about slaves,
right? And
how should we be treating slaves in Jewish law? So if I remember correctly, that's what they are.
Again, this has a flip about it, which is we're talking about the slaves that are the other, but in this situation, we're the slaves.
Yeah.
Kind of, you get that kind of it's an interesting thing she did with water of this synagogue that's been beaten up pretty bad. Yeah, I kind of like that. I like it a lot.
Anyone else? We got, I think, 3 minutes, if I'm counting correctly.
I remember from the presentation a real discussion about what does it mean to be on the outside of the synagogue looking in. And with eyes towards like the emptiness of the synagogue. There's one person there praying, but we're not seeing a full, robust community. And it's still from the window. Right. So if I remember correctly, there were some discussion of also how do we relate to these laws in Mishpatim? How do we relate to the idea of slaves and how do we treat them today in this day and age? And so we have layers upon layers of interpretation and meaning that is also what do we do today in our own power and from our vantage point, which we're not in the synagogue, we're outside looking into our own tradition in a certain way. And yet there are some motifs of continuity and also recognition. Like we know that talit, we know that the aron, there's certain that the symbols of the hidden luchot are in there, and the Magen David as well. So these are symbols that we know, and some of them are foreign and some of them are more current. And it's a real question of this artwork bringing to life the questions from your Chavruta learning together. That's so powerful. Thank you so much for offering that presentation. Yeah.
Rabbi, where are you guys?
I'm based in London.
Okay.
It's also my last name.
Oh, okay. Right.
It is both. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry,
and
could I
actually
make,
Beverly.
could I make a comment?
Yes. Hello.
I entered late, but this moves me so much. I'm in northern Manhattan, Frankfurt on Hudson. A lot of German Jews had to leave Germany and settle in my neighborhood. And we have pictures of the synagogues that were burned during Crystal Night, and many people have memories of that as well. Fewer and fewer as time goes on. But I've come to the conclusion that we are a people of Exodus, that where we live gets corrupt and rusts and begins to pick on us. And to our advantage, when we go on Exodus, we can begin again. We begin fresh with the Torah, with what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be a mensch doing tikkun olam. And though it's very painful, that trauma that lives within us helps us as we, the next generations, me and my children, learn what it is to do tikkun olam. And I thank you very much for this wonderful artwork, especially the scales that are so important, equality in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next presentation, which includes Rabbi Aaron London and Tina Marcus. And if it's okay, I'll just read a very short bio from both of you. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So Rabbi Aaron London is a freelance Jewish educator, chaplain, and rabbi living in London. She is the project manager for the Honeycomb Project, a volunteer lay pastoral care training program. She is involved with a number of projects within the UK and the global Jewish community. And Tina Marcus's works are called soul selfies. Whereas most people today are taking pictures of themselves with their phones, she is painting snapshots of personal defining moments. Tina's mixed media assemblages are her selfies, focusing on the human figure, documenting historical and spiritual experiences, exploring conditions and circumstances, with themes revolving around solitude, aging, ambiguity, and the human spirit. And this was the work that came out of your learning of Parshat Pekudei. And I turn it to you.
Rabbi, do you want to say something first?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting. Ellie is making lots of noise. Sorry about that before. Yeah, so Pekudei was also a lot of fun to work with. Also feels like decades ago. I don't know how you feel about this, Tina, if you actually remember everything that we spoke about all those months ago. But again, it was, it's a somewhat seemingly simple parsha of describing the things that go into the Mishkan and that go into the tabernacle. But actually, when delving deeper, there's a lot more into it, in it, as one could say. And to me, it was a place of, looking at how can we make such a space that's thinking about inclusivity, and thinking about it as a full sensory art installation, right? Of that everything we wanted to create this Mishkan that was everything that we could hear and we could smell and you can imagine as we're building it. And it's also the center part of the community that was a part of everyone and a part of everything. I say that everyone brought in their own things to help with the building and to help out in the ways that they were physically possible, and thinking about what can we do in our own spaces, whether that's synagogues, community centers, schools, I don't know, what have you, whatever we might be in charge of or part of, to see how much we can help intentionally include as many people as possible at any given moment. That is my very shortness, and I'll pass it over to you, Tina, for now.
Yeah, so again, the Parsha Pekudei is the last chapter in Exodus. And really what I'd like to sort of go over is just a brief overview of the Parsha itself, a reflection of my learning experience, and of course the process in making Pekudei, which I call the records of the tabernacle, the faces of time, which of course is the title of the work. But in terms of an overview, very simple, Pekudei are the tallies and the records of the materials collected for the tabernacle. It talked about the garments, then the furnishings, how the garments were made, the management and the responsibilities of the tabernacle, and of course the tasks that were assigned by Moses. But the Parsha also describes the stages of how the people's donations, I guess you can go back to that first, thank you, how the donations were combined, how they were brought to Moses, and of course, exactly how they built it. So in studying the Parsha, I could have focused on any one of those ideas, but really what had stood out for me is that there was one line that basically said Moses could not have collected nor erected the tent of meeting alone, and that there were very many moving parts. You had the Levites, you had the tradesmen, there were the women to make the garments, and of course the entire community to create the architectural structure, the tabernacle. So really in reflection, it became very obvious to me and compelling that my interpretation for this Parsha was to create some type of a three-dimensional form, which became the faces of time, the making of a community, honoring the people who actually helped in the building of creating the tabernacle. And so these faces of time are really not meant to be realistic in any way, shape, or form, but more to capture what might have been discovered artifacts. So also while I was thinking about making this tabernacle, making this piece, I thought about the Hebrew text itself, that it would be a backdrop to these faces of time. And so when you took a look and you read through the Parsha itself, it really talked about all the things that were necessary to make that tabernacle. So in terms of the process, I started lining up the Hebrew text, as you can see behind each one of these faces. And this idea really quickly developed into a vision that this piece would be the backdrop to support the faces of time and to be like a Torah open for all of the world to see. But interesting to note that when I was making this piece, when it was finished, it was 20 inches high, it was 38 inches wide and 6 inches deep. And unintentionally, when I look at the Torah itself, it's very reminiscent of the same size. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the materials that I used, because I think this is important as part of the process, is that the materials that I chose to make this piece, and especially the faces, were purposeful to have a feeling of being concrete or stone-like. And so I thought about the strong will of the people in order to make the tabernacle. So I thought it would be very befitting to have these faces look like stone. If you can go to the next slide. So the faces are not fully developed. They are as though they would be artifacts, as though they might have been uncovered from an archaeological site. They are worn, they're pitted, they're fractured, they're undefined. And so the backdrop to the Hebrew writing at the bottom is eroded, perhaps, indicative of outside elements wearing away the parchment over many, many years. So just to take a very quick tangent about the lighting of this piece when I was photographing it, depending on how the light source hit the figures, their faces became very multi-dimensional in a way that how the lights and the shadows were cast on the figures, they may have looked older, they might have looked younger, they could have been masculine or feminine. So I thought that was really interesting when it came to, looking at the piece itself, that they were the faces of time. And so in terms of the overall learning experience and outcome, when I think about it, the three-dimensional sculptural faces, these people really are the faces of time that fill and fulfill the tabernacle. Bria, can you go back just to the previous slide? Thank you. So what it really represented for me is that all that was necessary to build a home for God, that we, all of us, within us, we carry that emotional and physical embodiment, that of being the tabernacle, a mishkan, wherever we go. And that all of us, we are that vessel, okay, that holds and contains that tabernacle within us, that fulfills God's will to make this world a home. But I also saw it as that what better place, our physical being, that these are the faces of time, the people, us. We are that vessel that fulfills God's will. So the biggest outcome for me in learning with Rabbi London is that one does not necessarily need to have that architectural structure to go to, but our bodies are that architectural space. And that the tabernacle really resides within all of us in our bodily architectural form. And it's where we can fulfill divine purposes and being that tabernacle. So that was my learning experience in studying the last chapter of Exodus, Pekudei.
Beautiful. So we have time for one comment, reflection, question from anybody.
I liked that I don't see the size, they look small on the screen, but I like the idea that each one looks also a little bit like a mirror with a candle, and I can see myself in each one, like in a mirror. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you.
We actually have time for more than one comment, question, or reflection. Yeah.
I just want to say that I really like that the faces aren't completely formed, because I can really see maybe projecting faces onto these white forms, or maybe you like photoshopping a face, and it is people. Anybody could be this face through time. So I think that really touched me that you did that.
I appreciate that, Beth. Thank you. And a lot of my work, my pieces are not necessarily dismembered or not finished, but it's so that somebody else could put their own projection into it. That, I just don't want to be so specific that this is what it has to look like. I mean, it's just that tactile feeling of the emotional response that you get from the piece. Thank you.
Yeah, and they don't really have an expression, so you could kind of imagine any expression on them that might come to your mind. So thank you.
I really love what you were saying about the images almost being, or the faces being like from an archaeological dig. Just in terms of a reflection on history, who are the people that we actually find? Oftentimes it's just a cup here and there, broken vessels from the traces of life. And here you're unearthing, bringing to life these images, these people, both in the ancient period who were involved in the creation of the tabernacle, and then also for this beautiful message of all of us being able to be tabernacles for God in this world, and for the backdrop to be the Torah portion itself. I was wondering, just with the edges, you didn't decide to do the full piece of the Torah, like it's cut off at the end. If you could just say one word about that.
Yes, so really the bottom is meant to be eroded as though perhaps it was sitting someplace, like the scrolls themselves, and that over time the bottom part might have gotten wet or soaked, and then it was just sort of, this is what was left, you know, when somebody found it. Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for making this beautiful piece of work out in the world, that every time we read Parshat Pekudei, we can go deeper into it with this piece and with your
I
words.
would like,
Mhm.
I would like to say one thing before we go to the next artist. Again, I know that I've said this before, but I just want to say thank you to the Amen Institute and all of the folks that were involved in bringing really this special project work forward. I mean, it was such a richly rewarding experience to be a part of. And of course, especially, you know, witnessing all the other amazing interpretations from the talented artists, along with really the inspiring rabbinic learning experiences. This is just like a one of a kind. And I just say the insight and the concept is just absolutely beautiful. And just wanted to say thank you again.
Thank you so much. Wow. It's very exciting to be at this point, the culmination of all the works of all the artists and all the rabbis together. It's very heartwarming to be at this moment. Thank you. So I'm going to just try to redo the page so it's full screen. So I'm going to unshare and then reshare before we move on to the next. So let's stop the share.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Tina. This is great. I'm gonna.
Nice to see you, Rabbi.
Thanks. I'm gonna go take this little one to bed. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you might be in the world.
Right.
And awesome job, everyone, artists and rabbis and teachers. Bye.
Bye. Okay, we'll start from the beginning. Just let me know. You can see it. Okay, and this is the information for anyone who wants to see the further works of Tina Marcus or Rabbi Aaron London. All right. Next up, Rabbi Bronwyn Mullen and Ellen Holtzblatt. Please come forward.
We're here. Hi, Bronwyn.
Hey,
It's been a while.
I know it's been way too long. This is so nice to see you.
Yeah, we're just having a reunion. Everybody, thanks for
Yeah.
joining us.
Exactly. I was kind of how I was thinking. I want to ask all the questions like, how's life? What's going on? But
And I have answers later.
good. I have answers too. Okay, we're gonna have a separate kibbutz session, but we'll talk about the work. I'm so
A quick
excited.
question. Do people see it larger than it was before?
No.
Oh,
No,
I'm not. Oh,
it's not larger than it was before.
let me see. No.
No, maybe not. Okay, I might try for the next one. Sorry, my bad. Okay, carry on.
No,
Okay.
always working to get larger and larger. So anyway, so I guess I'll do a little intro to the parsha and sort of a little bit about our process. I think we'll just go back and forth. So maybe everyone here can get a little taste of what Ellen and my amazing chavruta was like, which is really so deeply, Jewishly nourishing, humanistically nourishing, in all of the ways. So we had Parshat Vayigash, which is towards the end of the book of Genesis, and it's where we've already been through the sale of Joseph by his brothers into Egypt, and now we've sort of arising at this kind of 11th hour number or moment in the story where Joseph, in fact, has now become the second most powerful person in Egypt, and his brothers have fallen on hard times as there's been this famine that has affected not only the land of Egypt, but many, if not all of the surrounding areas that are actually under, so to speak, Egypt's control, or about to be under Egypt's control. And in fact, Joseph is actually sort of the mastermind behind actually convincing large amounts of people to sell themselves, actually to sell over their autonomy to the Egyptian government, to the Egyptian rule, in order to be provided with food, which is sort of an interesting situation where we're talking about what does it take to survive in this world? And Joseph is someone who, as Ellen and I were sort of exploring and expounding upon, is someone who has really has lived a deeply traumatic life in terms of understanding his own value and understanding his selfhood and his autonomy, his physical autonomy, his emotional and spiritual, intellectual autonomy. And, you know, this experience in so many ways of being sort of pushed down and sort of controlled by family is something that is a huge part of many of our experiences. Is something that Ellen and I personally shared, really was very relevant to us. And just to say for a moment, like in the broader picture, I think we see there are lots of ways in which the younger brother, so to speak, if we talk about society as a family system, right, who's often the dreamer, maybe a little bit of the outsider, the person who sees things in different ways, can be the artist, is often oppressed and sort of felt need to be controlled by the larger sibling, the larger entity. So all of this is to say is that there's sort of this fantasy reversal where in fact the disempowered brother is now in charge and now has a moment of real possibility of not just confrontation with the brothers, even though he's still maintaining this disguise, but there's actually a real opportunity for tshuva. There's an opportunity for the brothers to take responsibility for what they did, even though they know that this is not actually, they don't know yet that this is their actual brother who they're confessing in front of, but there is potentially a moment for them to show that they've really, they've come to look at their actions and see the wrongs in which they've done. And the moment that Ellen and I really focused quite a bit on is when Judah, in fact, being given this opportunity to sort of recount what happened to this younger brother of his, to this Joseph, he actually ends up repeating the very same lie that's been perpetuated in the family throughout the entire time, saying that, yes, we had this brother who was torn by beasts, and if we don't come back with our brother Benjamin, who Joseph is actually very strategically sort of holding captive, if we don't return back with him, surely you will send this old white-haired man down to his grave. And in that moment, we were just struck by this kind of everlasting question of, well, Joseph never gets the tshuva that he deserves. There isn't really an apology. There really isn't a clean and clear resolution in this family drama. There's sort of, at a certain point, there's a bit of an acceptance that maybe we never get that fantasy tshuva. And yet somehow we still have to be in meaningful relationships somehow. So I'll stop there. That's the first piece is kind of like, I guess, giving us a little bit of the story landscape and the emotional landscape. And then I'll turn it to you, Ellen, to talk about how the artwork emerged, and then we'll volley.
So this one is titled, actually, what was the title? It's One That Found Peace. I tend to write long titles, so sometimes I don't remember them. But it is a drawing of my mother. It's ink on Japanese paper. And it's also involves quite a bit of tearing, a little bit of gluing, a little bit of repairs. So it wasn't just the image that became important. It was also the process that became important. I do want to just say really quickly, I apologize. I'm in a public place. And I thought that I was going to have more privacy here, but I don't. And there may be outside noises. And if that happens, just so you realize that that's what's going on. But you know, we always have like noises in our life that come in and interfere with what we're doing. So maybe this is actually kind of perfect. But as I started working on this, and I realized I started things were happening that I wasn't happy with. And I started taking an X-Acto knife and tearing away at the paper. And I discovered that I could actually tear this paper. I could tear a whole layer off the top of it. And it looked like a very fragile paper, but the paper, for the most part, maintained its integrity. Parts where it started to tear, and you could see if you show the next slide, I know this is very small, so it's a little hard to see. If it was larger, you might be able to get a better idea, but there are parts where the paper is actually tearing, and then I'm coming in and drawing over the torn areas. And it started to become important to think about how, as we have tears in our life, we have tears in our relationship, we have tears in our emotions, and then they become, but we still maintain, somehow there's a resilience that not everybody, unfortunately, can maintain that, but we work to maintain that integrity, that resilience. And that's that kind of a sense of wholeness. And Bronwyn was incredibly generous in our discussions with not only sharing her knowledge, but also sharing herself. And that really became a huge part of our, she said, yeah, really, it was just a deeply emotional and meaningful experience, because it wasn't, I'm not, as I said in my previous thing, I'm not a Bible scholar. I approach everything from the personal. So I have to, I was working through my relationship with my mother. My mother is now 99 years old. She was 98 when I did this. I relate to these experiences through what is going on in my own life and my own relationships. So I understand Joseph and what he understood with his brothers through the relationships I have with my own family, with my mother. And the other thing I did want to say about this specific drawing is that I started to really think about the figure as being a part of the landscape. And originally I thought, okay, the figure is going to be enveloped by the landscape. The landscape is going to be terrifying in a way, because it starts to take over. But when I started to realize recently, and I do want to show the next slide, this is not the work that I made for this, but it's one that I just finished recently. It's a very large painting. It's about 4 feet by 7 feet. That it wasn't just that the landscape became terrifying. Maybe the landscape is us. We are also the landscape. We're a part of the landscape. We are part of the universe. We are part of each other. And they're the boundaries that we experience, that we have to experience to be sane in our everyday lives. They're not, so when we're talking about tshuva and expecting tshuva from someone else, we really have to think about ourselves. And we can't, like Bronwyn said, we can't always get that from someone else. We really don't. And I learned that many years ago in therapy when I really was trying to get it and I realized it wasn't going to happen. But we do have to just focus on ourselves and where are we in this world? So anyway, thank you. And I just also, I didn't say it at the beginning, but thank you to the Amen Institute. Thank you for this opportunity. And again, thank you, Bronwyn.
The feeling is so mutual in every respect, and thank you to the Amen Institute. It's been so just rich and inspiring. I just want to say I'm so glad, Ellen, that you brought in this piece about the lens, because I remember, as you said, I was like, oh my God, that was a big part of what we had discussed when you started bringing in the actual piece, that it was just reminding me that part of the thing that's so interesting is that in this family drama is how important land is. You know, and the idea of wanting to return to the land of your fathers, or that you're going to be coming to a new land, right? Which Joseph has effectively had to, this new place, Egypt, which is by no means, in terms of the larger Jewish narrative, the safe space by any means. But like Joseph has had to kind of create a different landscape for himself that he can be a part of, where he can be seen and appreciated and sort of be at peace. But then even in the end, right, he wants his bones brought back to the original landscape, like where, and just anyhow, just that you highlighted with this new work, which is so beautiful, just really, yeah, brings that to the forefront again.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you both.
Could I say something? So I want to thank you so much, Rabbi and Ellen, for these beautiful pictures. They remind me of my mother. And you need land in which to grow yourself and your children. And your mom is 99 years old. What did she live through so that you could become an artist and you can become a rabbi? Out in the open, Joseph told his family, if you have to be slaves to eat, do it. My grandfather came over and he was told, if you can't come in on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Monday. And yet my son is conservadox now, and proudly. and his children wear yarmulkes. Where you settle is so important. Thank you so much for bringing this to life.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, both of your words are very meaningful. We're going through so many different important themes very quickly, but about forgiveness and about also I'm captured by the idea of ripping, of this idea of ripping the paper, and also with Jacob when he was mourning the loss, that he didn't quite know what happened to his son. There's just this ripping,
Right.
and this, like, when we mourn, we rip, and then there's also in Jewish tradition the idea of stitching up the rips, but not always, and they don't always grow back. And so our lives are imprinted by our relationships that we have. And I also just want to say that the relationship between both of you in your chavruta was also very apparent in your presentation this past year, and very worthwhile for anyone who didn't get a chance to see it to go back and really get to hear that beautiful presentation.
It was truly a great shidduch. You did really well. Thank you.
Exactly. Always appreciate a good shidduch. Thank you.
So take a deep breath, everyone. We will be moving on to the next chavruta, next parsha, next theme. And you can also take a look at the schedule too, to see what's going on. If you want to stay here or move elsewhere, that's always an option. And just to get a sense, can everyone see the screen larger right now? Yes? Okay, great. All right. So Rabbi Bronwyn Mullen and Beth Achenbach. Here you go.
Hey, hey,
This is
Beth.
the piece.
Hey, Bronwyn.
Hey. So here we are again, and yeah, I guess we'll again give people a taste of our chavruta. It was so much fun. I mean, we've chavruted a lot of Jewish texts before. We've chavruted a lot of art. We've even made art together before. But in this context, I think was really cool around a parsha. Yeah. Okay. So I'll give a little background on Parshat Naso. We're now in the book of Numbers. I just want to say that this is a parsha that I felt very confident going into the Chavruta with Beth. Is an artist I extremely respect and love her work in photography and performance art, in poetry, and all across the board. And so Parshat Naso is a little bit of a disparate parsha. It covers several different things. We have a fairly large description of the actual not building, but the construction and set strike, as it were, of the Mishkan and the tabernacle, sort of at large, and then very quickly we move into what I've always thought were the most dramatic pieces of this parasha, being the story of the Sotah, the accused woman, the woman who is believed or suspected by her husband to have secluded herself with a man who she wasn't supposed to, and that this woman is then forced to undergo a ritual. She's brought to the elders of the town. She is forced to drink a bitter water concoction, and when she consumes this water, she either is proven innocent if she becomes pregnant, which is an interesting conclusion, or she's guilty if her belly distends, which sounds like a pretty horrible thing to happen. And in general, it's a very strange and upsetting ritual, and the Talmud does a lot to sort of limit the extent to which it could have ever actually been practiced. There's also sort of a number of apologetics made around it. It's like, well, because if she's found innocent, then she's actually protected for life because her husband can never divorce her, right? Because that's obviously a huge prize, because who would, right, not want to stay in that situation after undergoing that sort of an ordeal. But after the description of the story of the Sotah, we then move into the description of the Nazir, a figure who has decided to abstain from all forms of alcohol, cutting of the hair, is living probably the closest that we have in Jewish tradition, at least in Jewish biblical history, to a life valorizing asceticism. And so it's sort of a wild parsha in a lot of different ways, covering many, many disparate areas. But having studied this parsha before, having made my own artwork on it before, having taught it before, and sermonized on it in many contexts, I was very, very convinced. I'm like, I'm going to go into this with Beth, and we're going to do Sotah, and she's going to have some fabulous and interesting take on Sotah. And Beth was not interested in that at all. Instead, yes, laughing at it now, instead, Beth was consumed with these elaborate descriptions of the setup and takedown of the tabernacle, which was devastating to me, but really not devastating me, not just devastating, but actually terrifying, because I had to come face to face with the fact that actually I had never really spent any significant time with that part of the text. I really didn't have a good handle on it, a visual conception of it. It also made me feel exposed as, that like maybe I'm not as artistic as I think I am. Like, shouldn't I have an understanding of how all this material works? And anyhow, I'll turn it to you, Beth, to talk about what moved you about it, what was exciting about it, and we'll go back and forth.
Sure. I mean, I did not have any preconceived ideas about where I wanted to go with this at all. It was when, we had our first meeting, and Devere was in that meeting with us, and we started to read the Parsha, and we didn't get very far.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it's a lot of people. And normally, now I do have to tell people, I'm sort of like a baby Jew. I say I grew up very secular, and it's only been in the last 4 years that I've learned more about Judaism and started going to synagogue. So this was a really great experience for me. And I had done previously some Torah study with Rabbi Bronwyn. But when I had read this Parsha previously on my own, I had just sort of glossed over all these numbers, this census of how many men between 30 and 50. In my mind, I had always thought, what's the importance of that? But when we started talking, I was like, it reminds me of a circus, and how many people it would take to put up that gigantic tent, and whose job it was. It was sort of, I think we said, like, we figured it was sort of an organized chaos.
Yeah.
And also this Parsha, like Bronwyn said, just it hits on so many things. And as a photographer, I was a little bit worried about how I was going to narrow all these, it's like 6 or 7 readings, I think, in this, into one thing that I could focus on. But then we started talking, we didn't get very far in our discussion, right? We got to this part, and it was like, it's a traveling circus. If you look in the poster to the left, in the very background, opaquely, you see all these tents sort of lined up. And that is an image of the tents of the Gershonites and the Levites and the Kohenites and the Merarites that I put in that background. It's 8,500 men that it takes to put that all together. So I think it's hard, because I know we don't have a lot of time trying to edit myself here. I think I just want to go into that. There's just so much going on that we and there's so much in Torah in general that we're constantly learning as each year, or depending on which rabbi you talk to, that I think that, like, peeking of that little opening of the tent, like it's all in there, sort of waiting for you to view. And if anyone's ever been to a circus, that's when you go in the tent, there's usually multiple things going on, and you could never see one thing at once. You have to pick which, you know, do you want to watch the elephants or do you want to watch the clowns juggling, or do you want to, you can't take it all in at once. It's a little bit too much. So it's all in there in the tent.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny because what this is reminding me of is that, like, part of the reason I think we got stuck there, which may have been my own baggage, you know, not surprisingly, is just that when you described it as a circus, it was hard to move beyond that, because circus is kind of like a trigger word for like the rabbinic imagination. Like, all in the Talmud, there is so much negative language around the circus, and particularly the circus that they're imagining, right? It's like the Roman circus where there's gladiators and there's a, you know, pretty good deal of pagan worship, etc. Like, there's this such a negative energy around the circus that there's also, it's in a Midrash collection too, but it's also in Talmud, where there's this fantasy about, or sort of fantastical story taught, where Naomi is actually preparing Ruth for her conversion, which is really interesting. And Naomi tells her, it's like, well, here are things you should know. Like, Jewish girls do not seclude themselves alone with men. Interesting, like, i.e. Sota, right? But then she also says that Jewish girls do not go to the circus. And it's like one of the key, like, this is considered like a core part of her lesson on what it means to be a Jew. And so just the minute you called it a circus, it was like this haunting thing,
Like a
where,
twitch.
like,
Did you twitch?
yeah, I totally did twitch. Exactly. Yeah, I was like, I just felt spooked by it, but in that spooked way, that's like, that's how you know there's a drash in there. You know that there's an artwork in there, because, like, well, it is kind of a circus. All of these things happen under a big gigantic tent, and it takes a whole crew of people to put together. And so it begs that question, like, well, what makes this circus okay? Like, and not only just okay, but what makes this circus holy versus another one, you know? It's fabulous.
The amazing feats.
Yeah, well,
I just want to let people know it's a photograph that I took actually of myself holding open this curtain. And then that frame is actually part of the photograph. The poster itself is obviously a graphic image that I created, and I actually photoshopped it into the frame after the image was taken.
Could I say something?
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Beth, this is so wonderful. I see we are a people going on Exodus, but within our own group, the women have to do a tightrope act. We are not in leadership. We are so vulnerable. And look at you. She's holding her foot up with an umbrella on one foot. She has to balance and raise her family. And the fire breather, if we do wrong, who are the leaders who are going to sting us burn us with their words? And the strong man, there are Orthodox synagogues where I live, where God is male. Only the men get to carry the Torah. We women have to sit. It's absolutely bizarre. And this strong man needs a strong woman next to him. But we don't have it yet. Reform, unreformed, we have it, and we have rabbis. But thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful representation of who we are.
Thank you, Regina. That's very nice of you. Thank you.
Any other comments, reactions, questions? Have a minute or two. I'm wondering, you're in the description, you're saying there's so much that's going on in the Parsha and in the putting up of the tabernacle, the taking down of it. It is chaotic in a way. And at the same time, the tabernacle, like, there's a center point to it. And it's usually behind the curtains, right? Like, and only a few people get to go in. to those places. So I find there's something very interesting, appealing, curious about what are we, even though there may be some chaos, a feeling of chaos all around, like what is behind that curtain? What is there? It's like boxes within boxes within boxes. If you start taking apart what actually is at that center point, and there's so much energy that's around it, but only one person gets to go in one time during the year, right? And even at that, it's dangerous. And you have like a little bit of smoke, I believe, in the description coming out from behind that curtain. So if you want to say one word about that.
Well, that's, I think in the description of the tab inside, and this is where we got a little lost, right? There's the tabernacle, and then there's the, is it the Mishkan where the actual ark is?
Yes.
Bronwyn, right?
Yes.
But there's a pit of fire in between those two things. And we did discuss how there's probably, always smoke emanating
All the time.
And also when God is talking and when Moses is in there, the smoke is rising. So that, and also I think we were trying to figure out, does the regular person, not just the men in the tents and the camps, but the women and the children, do they ever get to go into the tabernacle, or do they only ever just see that smoke rising and are very curious about what, and there is a curtain at the entrance. So, do they just try and get a glimpse of it, or are they just constantly just seeing the smoke rising?
So we're only getting a peek and a glimpse into your Ruta and the artwork. And I didn't get a chance to read through the bios, but there's a lot that's there, and everyone should feel encouraged and free to go onto the meninstitute.org just to find out more about each artist and rabbi and collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Yes, thank you.
All right, and we get to take a breath. Transition into the next piece, and that is, here we go, Rabbi Jason Herman and Esty Ellis. So there's this incredible process to your work as well, Esty, and I will just let you take it and give us an introduction. And I have your slides, so just tell me when to click.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's really wonderful to be here. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so I think I wanted to share a little bit about my work in general, and then the specifics for this project. And so I think when I think about my artwork, feels like there's two really main creative elements that go into it. There's the reflective comics that are in this graphic novel sort of style and aesthetic and inspiration. Then there's the Dvar Torah element as well, where there's this creative interpretation of Torah that's usually tied towards a particular life moment or event in the world. And so when I think of where I publish my work, in addition to it being online or on Instagram, having it in Sefaria is one of the things that really excites me, thinking about where art can fit into the Jewish library and where art can be used as a way of learning Torah. So this opportunity in general really excited me, and it was really wonderful to partner with Rabbi Jason Herman. And if you want to advance to the next slide, we can take a look. And I think just for the sake of time, we're kind of looking at this big picture, but essentially through the conversations with Rabbi Jason and myself, and as we talked about Parshat Tazria, I put together a 9-panel comic that explored some of the themes, and it both had the Torah that Rabbi Jason brought like into the conversation from the beginning, and then there's also the conversation that he and I had around that Torah. The result was this 9, like I said, 9 panels. Just kind of like from in this broad strokes kind of way, I'll note that as we're looking at it zoomed out perspective, you can see that some of the panels have this darker, thicker line around them, and that's representative of the conversation sort of as we're talking together in Zoom, in this Zoom space. But then you have the comics that have a slightly, or the panels that have a slightly thinner line, and this is where the sort of memoir-esque reflective part got to come into the conversation as well. And I got to reflect on the teachings and where it fit into my life. And yeah. The last slide that thank you, Rhea. The last slide that I wanted to highlight was, in addition to the visual output, I like to try to produce a verbal script that goes along with the comics. And this is really inspired by some conversations with Shoshi Finkel, who does incredible work just in terms of advocating for inclusivity and accessibility. And in some of our conversations, we had talked about how a screen reader can help with the just like access towards comics and towards comics. And I think about comics as a way of accessing Torah. And I think about how all of these things kind of work together. In addition to the visual, I have this text-based script as well, which sort of describes what's happening in each panel, kind of breaks down the visual and the verbal components. And I don't know if this selfishly is maybe a way to say it, but I feel like I grow as an artist when I do this exercise as well, because it makes me question what is the text versus what is the image in a comic. And I think that maybe it's possible to have a preconceived notion that they're very separate, but I think that this by making a script, I'm sort of forced to engage with that question. What is script, what is image? And I guess that's sort of a broader commentary on the piece as well. What is the Torah, what is the art, and how much are they interconnected? I'll pause here. Yes, thank you. And so yeah, we can take a look at the images more closely.
If there's anything that you want to say about any piece,
Yeah, no, let's just move.
let's look through all of them.
Thanks. I think we'll just move through it slowly. That way we can read it. Thanks, Ria.
Great.
I think I'll add one more thing, if that's all right. I think that one of the questions at this end of year moment when we're reflecting on the learning process and the conversational aspect and the
SD, it's 1 second.
I
We
guess the
might have.
distribution to
All right.
do you want to give me, sorry,
Yeah, we're experiencing a little bit of a lag.
sorry.
It's okay, I think. Let me just see.
One moment and I'll try to join from my phone.
Okay. And while
So-
Estie's doing that, think up some questions from what we just looked at. If you want to ask afterwards, if time remains.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can really hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think the last thing that I had wanted to say was how the conversation with Rabbi Jason at the end of March synthesized a lot beyond what had just come from our earlier conversations and our earlier Chavruta moments. I think the questions from those who had attended that session really helped illuminate some new details. And one of the ones that I just wanted to share was the connection between the content of Tzara'at and the sort of bodily affliction and the representations of bodies in comics. And I think there's something about thinking of Torah that talks about bodies and then making art that includes representations of bodies that really grounds and brings the Torah and the discussion to life in a way that was very meaningful. Are there any questions in the chat that I missed?
There might be an echo. No, we're okay. I am not looking at the chats, but maybe I should. If you do have a question or a comment or feedback, just raise your hand or you can unmute. Olga, I see your hand.
I just want to say I love the style, and I noticed sometimes the balloons looked like they were alive or they were characters or objects, and some of them looked like alembic, sometimes like the vessels in alchemical lab. So is it intentional?
Can you ask the question one more time? Sorry.
Sometimes the balloons, which were alive, I like that so much, but sometimes they looked like the vessels in alchemical lab, like alembics in some drawings. And that was very fun. Yes, like this one. So was it intentional? How did you come up with this idea? They look like characters or vessels. I think it's bizarre and very.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I think the part that it looks like chemicals was not intentional, but I think the part where it looks alive and there's something organic to it, I think was intentional, because I think that just when creating a comic in general, I like to think about there's more affordances than something that's only text or only images. They get to partner in a way that's very playful. And so I think that thinking about the text as a character that's interacting with the other sort of obvious characters is one of the conventions of comics that I am excited to use and to enjoy. Thank you for that question.
Yes, that was clear.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. And also, um, I saw something on Safaria, right? Right at the beginning.
Yeah. So that's one of the places where you can find the comics that I make. And I'm not sure if this was audible earlier, and I apologize for the technical difficulties, and thank you for bearing with me. But in addition to publishing my work on, let's say, in my portfolio or on Instagram, I like to have my work within the library of Safaria so that it can be connected to other texts. And so, thank you, Alona. Appreciate it very much. So when you are studying a text, in addition to seeing the commentary that are from traditional commentators, Rashi, Ramban, Rambam, you can also see the more contemporary works. And I think it's exciting to me to think about what does commentary look like when it's not only written, but when it's also in this visual format as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Say thank you to Esty for that. You can find out more information over here on esty.ellis.com, and then also find out more about the Chavruta experience with the Amen Institute and review that Chavruta debrief through the articulation. So thank you so much. We're gonna go through the slides and move on to the next Chavruta that Rabbi Jason Herman had, and that's with Deborah Band. And would you like me to read anything about a biography? I'm telling people to go and look at the website so we have more time to actually look at your artwork.
Oh, sure, that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine. I mean, if you want to do bio or something, that's okay too, but whatever you think works best.
Okay, if there is something important, I would say just mention it afterwards, and I would love to just
Sure.
get into your work that we can.
That's great.
view.
Lovely. That's wonderful. It's really great to be here this afternoon. I'm so grateful to Devere and to you for organizing this, and it was a real treat to have the occasion to do a deep dive into Vayechi. It's been very exciting. So let me tell you a little bit about the painting that's resulted from this collaboration. I should say Rabbi Herman wrote a wonderful Dvar Torah. He and I tended to focus on rather different things. And unfortunately, given the vagaries of software, I've been unable to pull up my copy of his Dvar Torah because I was going to pull some ideas from it, but I'm not at home right now. I didn't have access to my paper copies, and Microsoft Word decided not to accept that format anymore. Anyhow, so let me tell you a little bit about this painting. Much of my work, which is apart from hundreds of ketubot and several illuminated books of biblical text, each of which has been a collaboration with major scholars, they all begin with extensive study of the academic Bible studies and the Midrash, lots of rabbinics. And for 30 years, I've been working on building a Jewish visual symbolic vocabulary to express abstract values with images drawn a lot for Midrash. I haunt archaeological museums, particularly the Israel Museum and the British Museum, for artifacts of the biblical era and many other periods of Jewish history. And these can embody the abstract ideas and values that are raised in the biblical text. Jewish arts have always been a little thin on this, largely, I think, because we've had such a high degree of literacy and so didn't need to learn our religion through pictures. But in this very visual internet era, I think visual symbolism has a really dramatically increased importance. And I've brought all of this to bear on this interpretation of Vayechi. Now, the motion in Breshit is something that's just amazing to me. The book begins with creation of all matter and gradually narrows its focus down to one family and then one man, Yosef, and preparing us to burst into the broadening out of our tale with the creation of the whole nation of Israel, not one family, at the beginning of Shemot. And Vayechi is the turning point of this motion. And it's really fascinating in that. To me, it's striking that Yaakov's evaluation and prophecy, we talk about it being his blessings. They're not so much blessings if you read them. They're clear-minded, sharp evaluations and prophecies about his son. And they're offered here, not just his simple love and ambitions for them, but a clear-eyed, sharp evaluation of them as men, ranging from the ruthless to the euphoric. The focus on justice especially strikes me. And indeed, this aspect caught the attention of much rabbinic discussion in Breshit Rabbah, which is the main collection of Midrash on Breshit. In this painting, following the lead of the Midrash, I interpret the Parsha's very subtle ideas of justice and judgment, and our ability to course correct or not, following our mistakes. Micrography presenting the entire text of Vayechi winds and flows through the painting, and it flows because, of course, one of the most frequent metaphors in all of Tanakh compares Torah to flowing water. And beginning at the top, we see Kabbalistic ideas of God's creation of all matter, with God hidden from the material world by a firmament of cloud. I've encountered these ideas in the classical Kabbalistic writings of Meir Ibn Gabbai. I'm presently working with Art Green and the astrophysicist Howard Smith on a book of Ibn Gabbai's analysis of the mechanics, the mystical mechanics of creation. And below the clouds, we see a scale heading down into the material world. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, and the scale represents Jacob's, so I'm getting myself confused here. The scale protrudes down into the material world, and we see on it the judgment of the sons, Yaakov's judgment of the sons. We have Jacob's evaluation of his sons' characters, their sin and their promise. And this is the complexity of the future nation of Israel that will flow into the future and become us. The scale's balance offers the blessing, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, with which parents now bless their sons. The swinging pans hold imagery of the son's deeds and Yaakov's clear-eyed judgment. Sin is at the left, which is the Kabbalistic side of God's harsher attributes, outweighed by goodness at the right, the side of God's gentler attributes. Notably, the Lion of Judah, the tribe that will one day lead all Israel, looks back from the side of good, as Yehuda remembers his past abuse of his daughter-in-law Tamar. And he's now changed his course so dramatically, done such tshuva, that Yaakov, as he dies, knows that it will be this son's descendants who will merit the leadership of the people. The micrography ends at the bottom, you can see, with the word chazak, be strong, whose painted letters anticipate the temple's golden menorah. You can only see it in small parts there. It's still obscured. And this menorah, of course, is the one that Yaakov's distant progeny will one day light in the temple. Now, this is a fun piece here. You can see that palmette border that goes around the painting. This is adapted from a little ivory furniture plaque in the Israel Museum that is exactly contemporary with the building of Solomon's temple. And it was found in the remains of a palace probably about 50 miles away from Jerusalem. Palmette designs, if you think back to Malachim, to Kings, Palmette Designs figure among the decorations described for Solomon's temple in Malachim Kings, in Chronicles. And although there are hundreds of these patterns around the Mediterranean for 2,000 years, there's strong art historical reasoning to think that it's this particular pattern that was found so close to Jerusalem that's contemporaneous with the building of the temple, that may be very close to the one used by Solomon's designers. And for many years, I've used this motif to prefigure the temple, which was, of course, the ancient focus of divine energy on earth, and to which the heritage and value of justice that Parshat Vayechi brings to us leads. So there we are. I'll be happy to take questions.
Incredible, so detailed. So the micrography, the entire parsha that's outlined here is fabulous. And
I got it all in.
Incredible.
So now I should have said also that you can see the little plant things on either side of the word chazak at the bottom. These are classical Egyptian presentations of papyrus plants. And of course, papyrus is what Moshe would have learned to write on. This was the paper of the day. So, and it also needs water to grow. It's a rush that grows at the edge of water, at the edge of the Nile.
Gorgeous. Okay, any questions from our group of listeners?
Amazing.
Beth?
I think it's amazing. It's beautiful. And it's so detailed. I'm really just curious how long it took you to get it done.
I'm used to saying the little brownies actually come and do my work at night. And of course, it takes no time at all. I think I was probably working on this. My guess was probably about 10 days. It's the micrography that took a long, long time. So I was doing this in the middle of 2 book projects, so didn't have a whole lot of time to waste. So yeah, but it was a treat to do this. This is not a parsha that I had really explored in great depth before, and it's just so rich. I mean, these values of justice are both personally, the notions of how we do tshuva, and the value of justice and honesty and clear-minded evaluation of even the people we love is just so critical in our world, both privately and publicly now. It was great to have the chance to explore this.
What a wonderful, wonderful explanation, and what a glorious piece. Thank you. I was wondering, the fox there, what does the fox represent?
Was it Shimon or Levi? I forget who the fox is. I mean, there's something there for each of the tribes. I honestly forget offhand, but I can recognize the lion is there, the snake is there. Yehuda leaning over a bed with a woman in it is there. Sorry?
I thought perhaps the snake was the Garden of Eden.
No, it was associated with one particular tribe. Those are all images that Yaakov associates. Oh yeah, Dan is the snake. Yaakov describes Dan as the snake. But yeah, I worked expressly because so many of them are just so unexpected. And I'm not seeing the wolf quickly, but
what's interesting, I've seen the depictions of the different tribes on stained glass windows in synagogues before. That's a very, you were talking about archaeology and what do you find, and I've never seen them grouped together like this. Like all the symbols in kind of like one soup, and what would it have meant for certain brothers to have received a negative blessing, let's just call it, and right? And
It's
group
fascinating.
together, like what does that create in terms of family dynamics and so
Yeah, I
forth?
mean, there is nothing, there is, yes, and I can certainly make prints of this, so thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. Just drop me a note. It's, we talk about these because we want to be nice and a little bit sentimental, and always honoring of Yaakov's wisdom. But I think his real wisdom is that these aren't just sweet blessings. They're really tough-minded evaluations. They're tough, and they're pointing to areas where each of these sons need to improve. And you put this group of people with these attributes together, and you've got a really crazy soup. And if you look forward to so many of our deeds, if you look even just as far as Shoftim, you see so many of these harsher and more wonderful attributes coming out.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you. We have come to the next presentation and the end of this one, but I really encourage everyone to take a deeper look into this piece because there's so much that's here. It's like finding hidden gems in all corners, and it's just tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. So now we come to Rabbi Levish Hundert and Alessia Volk for a beautiful, beautiful artwork here. And I am not sure if either of them are here. I don't think so. And so in this session, what we're going to do is take the opportunity, maybe for a different kind of experience, to look at the art piece and see, what do we see in it? This is for Parshat Tzav, and it's for a parsha that deals with other bodily things, and also we have a description about this painting. So we can first hear the description and then really just have a collective conversation about the piece. And we have a few different slides that we can look through. Does that sound good? Okay. So there are different pieces, and Alessia Volk writes this. My paintings come out as attempts to translate from the fantastic hieroglyphs that I see in the patterns of nature, mostly in the tree bark. In other words, they are a sort of snapshots from the process of reading the book of nature by the mind. These snapshots exist somewhere in between the imaginary or the imagery and the language. I think that trees are folios and libraries that can be read, perhaps as well as anything around if we attune to it. The mind projects meaning onto the shapes and lines, but they are being reflected back, startling and puzzling. There is always a sensation of a mirror dialogue, of having been read by the book of nature itself. In my study of Parshat Tzav, I discovered a revelation about the different invisible levels of connection between humans and the animal world. The levels where, quote, to identify with one's sacrificed animal, extend beyond metaphor and speak to the subtle levels of awareness that fill the existence. I'm going to read that again. The levels where to identify with one's sacrificed animal extend beyond metaphor and speak to the subtle levels of awareness that fill the existence. That brought out for me a sudden echo and a sublime confirmation of what I always attempt to achieve with my art, the sense of an encounter with the natural realm, both conscious and subconscious, the world where any small action or move is significant and makes a difference. In this regard, we are held accountable and asked to uphold a moral ethic. Finally, this work helped me contemplate the role of the inner fire in the human heart, which is seen as comparable to the eternal fire on the altar in the temple. Artists and poets alike. To see the world is through an artist's eyes is to see it poetically. So I'll just take a look at the different pieces here to let you all absorb it and take it in. So that's the first one. Sorry, I think this one is called the temple tree. I think this one is called the tree of the altar, but she may correct my description.
What is the media?
The media is oil painting, oil and egg tempera on wood.
Thank you.
Yes. So just based off of that description, what do people see here? What are the colors? What are the shapes?
It's very internal. It's very vein, artery, bloody in a living way. Yeah.
There are animals inside as well, if you can view it at 200%.
Mm-hmm.
What animals do you see?
Sheep and goats and rams.
The sacrificial animals.
Exactly. The animals we need for sustenance.
There's something a little bit Chagall-esque. It also reminds me of some Rodin, and some of the sculptures of like the Gates of Hell, and it's in terms of the confusion of all these different forms. It's really interesting, and then the way the living images, the animals and people's faces are hidden, is something that you see a lot in medieval Persian manuscript painting, which I've always loved and I play with a little bit. These are striking.
There's a man sacrificing a goat also.
I do love the way the people and the animals look. They have similar expressions. The animals are quite human.
Thank you. Yes, I want to say when I started working on it, of course, this question started to cry out to me about the animal sacrifices. What is it to us now? How do I relate to it now? In conversations with ladies were helpful actually, because he was driving my attention. This idea with temple as some place where you can see this connection between human and nature. I remember asking him, what doesn't feel taking
Olga,
this?
can you come closer so we can hear you? I want to hear.
Do you like that? Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
I asked Rabbi, what does man feel bringing the innocent animal, the temple to kill it there? And he said that innocent, that innocence is the unknown part inside the man that he wants to discover, something like that. And I really like that answer. So I tried to make the painting about it in my own style. And if you see in one of these paintings, there is an innocent man, which I really saw him in the man with the goats who came there to understand what is beyond dying. On another painting, so I want to say what in general about my way of painting, how I do it. Usually I read something on the subject and I think about it. Then I go look at the trees. I try not to think about anything, just to see what the trees show and try to copy these images. And I actually, this approach started when I was a kid. I thought of the tree trunks as the scrolls with some unknown written messages that I tried to decipher. And then when I found out about the Kabbalah a little bit later and about the creation of the universe out of the language, I was like, wasn't I seeking for something like that? And when I started painting later in my life, that became my style, just reading the nature patterns, reading them as text with some Kabbalistic undertones. But sometimes I don't understand the image immediately. Like I copy the images from the tree, I can understand the meaning a little bit later. And that happened in this case. Actually, Rabbi Leibish was very helpful because he happened to be in Los Angeles with a concert, and I showed him some unfinished work. And I asked him something like, I see here Moshe and Aaron, but I don't know this bottle that Moshe is passing to Aaron, what is it? And he said, it's in a different paint. And he said, well, of course it is the cup with the oil for anointment. So there was no doubt. And there were a few insights like that. That was really helpful. Oh.
There's such a mystical quality in your work, where the pieces, where the nature is transforming constantly, and the human is like the animal, like the nature, and it's all interwoven, and they're distinct parts, but they're really connected. And also there's so much depth that's inside of these works that you did. I wonder, just in the amount of time that we have left, what was that process like for you to search with a rabbi the mystical side and bring that into your work? Already your work feels very mystical, but then to get an added layer of mystical interpretation, as Rav Leibish Hundert really gravitates himself to that. I'm wondering how that the Chavruta experience changed or informed your work.
Yeah, that's what I said. He made amazing guesses about some parts of my paintings that I didn't realize myself yet, like with Moshe and Aaron, or he found the It's for some few places like that. He decoded them for me. And also the main idea of the temple as a place where you come to understand what's beyond life and death. And actually, I tried to make the image of the altar, of the fire, of the altar fire. And I went to look at the burnt trees actually for that. And that's why you see a lot of reddish color. I exaggerated it a little. It's like maybe it is a fire, maybe these are burnt trees, maybe these are the blood cells. So it was supposed to be about the archetypal fire, the fire of creation, which is beyond life and death. And that was something we talked about with Rabbi Leibish, that was inspired by our talks, actually.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your work, and for when we come to this Parsha again, Tzav, to be able to bring this to the forefront when we're studying the Parsha, and also just on its own. I think it really stands for so much mystery and mysticism. So thank you for this work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this participation, for this chance. Thank you. I'm an Institute.
Absolutely. Wow. So drawn to it. Okay. Everyone take a breath. We're getting in so much art and Torah at the same time. I'm like, I love Torah and I love art. And so much at once is just expanding, expansive. So I'm sorry I didn't double check in the room properly before, just to make sure. But I don't see Dr. David Kramer or David Wander. If you're here, say hello. Okay, so in that case, we will do a bit of what we did before, and this was the artwork that came about from their Chavruta on Parshat Vayera. And for those who didn't get a chance to participate or listen to their Chavruta, what was interesting in this one was that there were different layers that that came about. We have kind of, if I remember correctly, it's like a paper cut type of initial drawing, and then initial collage, and then this very detailed painting that we have on the left side. And yeah, I will read. Oh, are we here?
Can you see me? Yeah. I
Oh,
don't know.
you're here.
I just came
Okay.
here. Right. Okay.
Great. Yes,
Great.
better than me speaking. Please,
No, you're doing great. I guess.
You share your work here.
Well, actually, the rabbi that I worked with couldn't be here today. So his name is David Kramer, Rabbi Professor David Kramer. And we have worked together for, I guess, about 14 years. And we've, over that time, we've done a whole series of books. We did the 5 Megillot, and we did Jonah, and we did Judith, and we did stories of Elimelech of Lezhensk and Zushia, and the stories of David and Samson. But we also, I've worked on something called the 5 books of David, and I'm now working on the 4 books of Moses. So I've done a series, I'm working on a series, and I work in a accordion book form. So the work can be, let's see, the work can be maybe 30 feet long. This piece here was done on wood. So, and this was something that I did, 1 second. This is something that I did specifically for this project, but I've been working on the story of Moses from birth till his death. So what this is, I rarely show two images of the same image. I started this image, and David Kramer saw this, and he liked the one on the right, and he said, "Oh, you really captured it." And then I worked more on another board. These are done on wood, and the one on the left is the one that I actually preferred. But he chose the one on the right. Can I read what he said about this? Is that appropriate to do that? Okay. So he said, it is this duality, the choice, that I see represented in the work, the two images of Moses, the messenger. In the first earlier, rougher image, Moses is hardly present. His structure is a mere scaffolding to be filled in by divine spirit, as the divine spirit requires. In the second, Moses is a fully formed personality, one that lives, his experience is on his face. We see the burnt mouth, the furrowed brow, the tired eyes, and the worn complexion. This is a personality whose surrounding story has been filled in. The trauma, the injury, the childhood choice, the fear, the brutality, and the plagues, the effort and trials of God's promise of salvation, which are represented by the cups. This too is God's messenger, but also his own. So which choice must we make when we are called upon to follow God's command? Must we erase our personalities, our wills, or may we be fully God's servants while remaining fully ourselves? Pious people through the ages have embraced both choices, one or the other as best path. I would like to believe that God's call doesn't demand self-emptying, but I recognize that there are many times for both options. The idea behind this is, the idea is that that the first one, it's sort of showing Moshe, but you really don't know who he is. You just know where it would go, where it would be. The other one, now let me speak a little bit about how I came upon that. This one, really, I see Moses as a person who was dealing with huge trauma his entire life, and who was also trained as a warrior. So his way of working in the beginning of his life was a little bit different than most. On the bottom part of the painting, can you make that larger? Is that possible to make this? In the bottom part of the painting, there's a story. It's like a midrash story where he puts on Pharaoh's hat, and everybody in the palace gets nervous and thinks he's trying to take Pharaoh's position, and they lay in front of him a scarab and a burning coal. And he goes to reach for the scarab, which at the time was a sign of royalty, a gold one, but an angel comes and grabs his hand, has him grab the coal that's on fire and put it in his mouth. The idea behind that is that from this point on, he burnt his mouth, he had a problem speaking, and he's the one who's chosen to speak. There's also a trauma that we don't really think about much, but that idea of a fire burning his mouth at a young age, when he's told to do actually what he's supposed to do, he has to sit or bow in front of a fire. So there's something about the image of fire that comes with it. Here, I tried to portray him in the Torah. He's an 83-year-old man. I tried to show him as a person with white hair, white beard. I tried to show the burnt mouth that he had. He's surrounded by the plagues that he's going to talk about, that he's telling the people about, which I found to be pretty scary. He's illuminated by the light of the fire, the burning bush, and close to him are hands coming in on the sides, telling him, I will take you, I will liberate you, and it brings back the idea that we all see ourselves as being liberated from Egypt in the Seder, in the Passover Seder. So it brings back the idea of the 4 cups of wine. But I basically wanted this to be a mirror where we see ourselves in it. And in that sense, this is what I tried to portray with the piece. But I really, really want to stress the idea that the trauma that he felt as a child actually lived throughout his life, and he being the one who has to be the spokesman. I also love, as his life goes on, he actually has a conversation with Hashem. They're on talking terms. They really, he does amazing things where it almost feels to me, when they're talking about destroying the people, but don't destroy the people. These, all of the things, the bargaining, the talking between Moshe and Hashem is amazing. And it's done with a person who is actually, I don't know, put upon, who's a little bit different than the whole group. And this is what I tried to portray. Yeah. The work is, the way I work is I work on wood. I work in different colors of rice paper. I cut those rice papers out and then I glue them on with acrylic matte medium. And then on top of that, I'll paint in acrylic paint. And then I might go back in and add more paper. And then, yeah, that's usually the way I work. And then usually, because I was a printmaker for many years, I'll usually put paint on top of it and rub it back selectively as if it were an etching plate or a collar type plate. But these pieces are about, I don't know, 18 by 24, something like that. Yeah. So that's what I have to say. Does anybody have any questions about this? Oh, Richard. Okay. Hi.
And Yona, I see.
Hi,
David.
Yona. Yeah.
Great stuff. So now, if my memory serves me correct, the left-hand painting has been worked on since the presentation way back when.
No. This is from the presentation.
Oh, really? Okay, because I did not remember the medrash, the bottom, which really is quite astounding. I mean, it's really, I'm very impressed. Anyway,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's sort of, I sort of made that to be the key to the painting. That it actually, in fact, this is from the Photoshop. I did another painting and I added it to it, but the idea was that the entire story is based on when he was a kid and he put the fire in his mouth. So that's how that came out. Yeah.
So David, just about 10 minutes ago, you asked me about abstract versus representation. I'm going to throw this back at you.
Okay, fine. Why not? Yeah. It's funny. Well, ask the question. I don't want to. Right.
Well, I know that you have. You said you love the left side. The left painting. You weren't sure about the right one. I had the same dilemma because I was working abstract and I thought, is it enough? Because I'm so used to painting figures, etc. I'm like, is it enough? And Toby said, yes, it's enough. And I'm saying the same thing to you. The one on the right is just as strong. It's totally different, but it has so much value on its own. It's very, very powerful.
Thank you. I have that same dichotomy. I have that same fight with myself. But, David Kramer, who I study with, when he saw the one on the right, I don't know if you had heard, when he saw the one on the right, he said, that's it. It's finished. You don't need more than that. This is, it's enough. What I also had, which I didn't put in with the colored paper, there's a fire from the bush that's underneath. But if you look at the drawing, there was going to be a fire in his mouth also. So that, but even that isn't in it. But I do have the feeling that, what I mean to say, the psychological trauma that I mean to be talking about comes out stronger in the one on the left to me, but it's funny to show two pieces when one is asked, it's for one, so that's that really shows that. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Rena Fruchter. I'm curious as to why Moshe is depicted in such a modern way in terms of the hair and the quad.
Right. The reason I do that is because, it's funny that you say in a modern way. I'm always taken by the biblical paintings from the Renaissance. And I think, oh, that's the way they looked. But in fact, they're dressed like they were dressed in the Renaissance. Or maybe they have some bathrobe-y things on. But, I don't think it's actually, we know what Moses looked like, of course. We don't know what he dressed in. So when I talk about making it something where we see ourselves when we look at Moses, that's why I make it contemporary. And I feel, it's a struggle that he had. It's a struggle we all have. So I that's why I tried to make it actually almost as contemporary as I could make it. I also tried to, not so successfully, but the four hands that are coming on all sides, I tried to show different complexions of skin color. That's what I tried. That's what I tried to show. Yeah, that's why.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll have a Sacrifice of Isaac painting with somebody wearing a suit and tie. I mean, has no problem with me. Like that's the way I work. But any other questions?
I think we're actually at a wrap up, and
Wonderful.
which is great. There's so much here, and I'll just say it like a very interesting thing that when you're saying the trauma that Moshe kind of experienced, those hands that are coming towards him with all of these demands. I think there's something interesting, like save us, and you took us, and those are all the things that we say that God did, and yet it's like through Moses, and you can kind of see that pain on the face. There's a lot that's there to look into.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So
Great.
We have the next honor to hear from Maxine Lee about the artwork that was created in conjunction with the Chavruta with Rabbi Aaron Levy. And this is Peace, and this is Maxine Lee.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can all hear me all right. I seem to have come down with a cold in the past couple of days. So thank you. But yeah, I guess I'll just get right into it then. Rabbi Levy and I were learning Parshat Truma together. So this comes in close to the middle of Sefer Shemot, and it is the beginning of a big, long section of Parshat about the Mishkan. And it was really great to get to learn this with him. I think, our minds work in kind of similar ways, which means that, in some ways we can just keep, running with something. I think in our first meeting, we started to read the Parsha, and we didn't get past the first pasuk, which is just Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. I think as we went over to the Ramban's, he has a big kind of opening statement about this Parsha and what the building of the Mishkan means in terms of the people's like taking it upon themselves to enter into this new relationship with God. And then we just, went into like different midrashim and, Agada from the Talmud. And really what is in this Parsha is just a big, long list of materials that the people brought. And I really felt that, by the end of our learning together, I had, this big, palette of sources to kind of pick from and look at. And so I think several kind of made it in. And I guess from that, I decided to kind of, work many materials into this work. I think you can see probably there are, different beads and stones. There's tulle that I used for the pillar of smoke. There's there's some wool yarn and cotton in it as well. And in some ways, I was a little intimidated coming into this, I guess. I have more experience working with textiles than I do with, just painting. But this was kind of the image I had for it in my mind. So I decided, just go for it. And there were some ways in which that process of kind of figuring it out as, parts of it, figuring it out, whereas as I went on and, other parts of it feeling more at ease with the technique, I imagine was kind of similar to the way the Mishkan was built in terms of, you have like all of the people contributing to not only the constituent parts of it, but also, putting things together. All of the women worked on weaving and sewing, and, the men were all involved in the metalwork. And, these are all people, I'm sure, who had done various types of labor in their lives, not necessarily the ones that, certainly in some cases, the ones that they were, using to build the Mishkan, but those would have been kind of the leaders of those particular projects. Whereas, other people had to learn, and in the end, created this magnificent Mishkan that they had. So I guess looking a little bit closer and kind of thinking into some of the commentaries and midrashim that Rabbi Levy and I looked at, there are lots of, I guess, different ideas about what the Mishkan is. In some cases, it's compared to a chuppah. In other cases, it is either kind of like the seat of God or God's home amongst the people. And then out of that come these kind of different ideas of different configurations of relationship between God and the Jewish people. I think many of us are probably familiar with the idea of God and Israel being like spouses. If we think about Shir Hashirim, and also images of the people following God into the desert, like they're newlyweds. And so that definitely connects in with the building of the Mishkan as a chuppah. And, as I said earlier with the Ramban, the building of it is this act of kind of solidifying and, formalizing this relationship that they have, making it something that can endure. But then there are also other ideas, I believe, from the Pesachta Dor of Kahana, where I think it's the kind of situation is that the Torah is God's daughter, and God has, allowed the Torah to marry Israel. And, but, God doesn't want to part with the Torah. So he has the people build a Mishkan where he can, kind of have a place to live alongside them, which I think is very sweet. I think so. This is just something that I've been thinking about recently, which I guess I hadn't been thinking about as much at the point when I was making this work, but lunch over Shmini Atzeret, I think one of my hosts was giving over this idea from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Zetzel, in which he described the relationship that we have to the Torah as being, like a relationship between people, in terms of, I think he says something like, the greatest love affair is the one between the Jewish people and the Torah. And there are other things like, you stand for the Torah as you would, someone who you have respect for. The Torah is there with you like your friend, et cetera, et cetera. And the one that I was waiting for that I did not hear, I don't know if it wasn't in the original, I guess, writing or vort that Rabbi Sachs gave, but I was waiting to hear, and the Torah is like a baby as well. I think that's something that I have a little bit of a sense of. I remember the first time someone gave me a Sefer Torah to hold. I was a little nervous, and the woman who was passing it to me said, "Oh, don't worry, you already know how to hold it. It's like, holding a baby or a toddler, I guess, depending on the size of the Sefer Torah." And that also kind of reminded me of, I guess, a comment that I had gotten from Rabbi Zosker Katz when I first presented this work, in which he said that he initially thought that the woman in the foreground was holding a baby, which she isn't. She has, a bunch of linens that she's bringing to add to the rest of the donations. But what's also in her basket is a copper mirror, which in the Midrash Tanchuma is said to have been used along with the mirrors of all of the other women to make the kior, so the big basin in which the Kohanim would wash themselves before, doing their work in the temple or in the Mishkan, in this case. And the interesting thing about that is it's this kind of lovely little subversive midrash in which Moshe actually doesn't want to accept any of the mirrors because, what they represent in terms of vanity and, perhaps promiscuity, but, God says, not at all. Like, these are kind of like the most prized gifts to me, because if it weren't for these mirrors, we wouldn't have this generation of people who are now, here building the Mishkan and, serving God and Torah. And so, yeah, that's another way in which these kinds of ideas about close relationships come into this. Of course, there is a limit placed on the donations that can be given. At the beginning of the Parsha, we have, this statement of Kulish Esher Yadvenu Libo, to bring all of these gifts. So, everyone who is so moved, whose heart is moved to contribute, can do so. And then, in one of the following Parshiot, we find that, the people have brought, they keep bringing things, and, it's too much. And Moshe needs to tell the people to stop bringing everything, which I think also makes that stand out in terms of accepting the copper mirrors. It's not that like there was a surplus of things, but these were Dovka things that were accepted.
Maxine,
But,
your Torah flows. It continues and continues. So I'm just
yes,
like,
to wrap up.
there's so much. Yeah, if there's
Mhm.
final concluding thought or something
Yeah.
like that.
And a final concluding thought. Yes, and I guess just this phrase, this other phrase that I have in the corner, thank you, Bria, for pointing out the first, is another one that, refers back to the idea of marriage and of the kind of formalization of this relationship. On one hand, it is the closest and kind of most personal thing possible. On the other hand, it is something that does have a certain structure and, I guess agreed upon terms that I guess can be a bit ambivalent and difficult to, I guess, figure out in terms of too much, not enough, and all of this, but it's a process of figuring that out. Thank you.
Incredible. Incredible. We actually do have some time for questions or a comment or two, because I don't think Joshua Hooper is here. But yeah, if there's a comment, a question, I'll just say one little piece. As you were talking, what stood out to me was you said your natural medium is not in painting, but it's in material, right? It's like in sewing and stitching together. And so here in the desert, you have this like openness, and what does the desert call? It's like something completely new. And you have this wealth of gift through the materials that are brought. And the materials themselves are just in these piles, and it's like you can feel that momentum of like, where do these things even come from? Right? These gifts, these materials. And when you're talking about the Mishkan of like building something that is supposed to house, let's just say, God, the most immaterial, but in the material, you really get this beautiful contrast of striving for abundance and giving over generous. Like, how do we even express that love and connection? It's like with all this material world that we have. And when you made that connection to a baby, it's like when there's a baby in the midst, as Regina was saying before, the next generation, like we want to give everything to that love. Or if it's in a couple, there's like this generosity, and it's almost like, where does it even come from? Somehow, even in the desert, all the material comes, and it's like, it's so abundant. So there's so much depth in, and also that story that you were sharing of how it came to be. Just wanted to point out some of those reflections. And maybe one more comment if there is any in the group.
Yes. I live in Manhattan and travel to the different neighborhoods, including those neighborhoods where the city is not going to do your neighborhood garden. You have to do it. And I have found that that's so great, because there's always 2 or 3 older women who gather the kids and the teenagers and build the garden. And the kids, instead of expecting the garden, make the garden, volunteer for the garden. And it is an education, it is an opportunity, it is a memory as they go on towards adulthood. So in poverty is wealth.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. All right, everyone. We're taking more Torah and more wisdom Thank you, Maxine Lee, for all of that nourishing Torah. And we'll move on to our final presentation with Rabbi Aaron Levy and Yoshua Hooper, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it because Yoshua Hooper is on the road. So we will listen to the piece description that he wrote about this, Parshat Behar, and then also we'll take some comments of what do we see in this piece, questions that it elicits, and just reactions more like in a collective sort of way. And this is what he writes. The main source of inspiration for my artwork comes from the Zohar. It reflects the teachings of Rabbi Shimon, who states that at the time of redemption, it will be a precept for the shofar to be blown on the Jubilee. At this time, Bnei Israel will gather and assemble from the four corners of the earth. Each one will fulfill its appointed functions. So in this Parshat of Behar, we hear about the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year of redemption, which calls out to all the people freedom, Juror, right? That's the Hebrew term, that there's going to be this turning over of society, the release of slaves, release of debts, starting from zero in a way. And it comes through the shofar blowing, and it's a call for redemption. And I'm just reading here what we see, the words that are written on top. It says, Ve'asitem et chukotai, and you shall do my laws. Ve'et mishpatai tishmeru ve'asitem otam ve'yashavtem ala haaretz levetach. And my laws you will keep and do them, and you will be able to dwell on the land in security. So that is the proclamation that Yoshua Hooper decided to emphasize on the top there. And then we also have like a flag post from it looks like it's on some sort of wood, and you have a sheen that has the four strands, which is unusual, but it's on the tefillin, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I'm curious, what are other things that we're seeing, other questions that we may have from this piece? And I have it in a larger form here. Mike.
Hello. This is incredibly gorgeous. It blends to me like such mystical and esoteric vibes, and really makes me think of E.M. Lillian's work in the Art Nouveau age, and even a little Tolkien blended in there. So for me, it has such a epic story nature to it. I love its bilateral symmetry with the border work. And this piece was constructed how? Was it etched or painted or drawn?
It's a good question. We'll have to ask the artist or look on the website to see more in detail. Yeah, but you're absolutely right that it's, I remember from the discussion that there's a symmetry to it, and kind of this longing from the bottom up, bottom, and you have the shofar that's, if you see on the side here at the corners, they're being blown. And it's like from the earth, we're calling up to heaven, and the heaven is also calling down to earth for a day, or for, a new vision of what our lives can look like and be. You're absolutely right that it's drawing on the mystical tradition, and he says so himself from the Zohar. Lots to unpack here. Other reflections, questions that you may have, things that you notice as you look closer. And we can also just look at it and appreciate it.
The Shaddai on a flagpole is us. It's our symbol. It's so beautiful. It's what we believe. It's who we love.
It's an interesting, the shin, right? That's made in this way with the four strands. It's found on the tefillin boxes, because of the 4 different compartments that exist within it. And it's right. It's like the shin is the Shema or the Shaddai, and I will not speak for the artist, but in my assessment or like interpretation, there's how do we even get to a place of redemption? What are the steps that are taken in the Torah? We have, you wait in the 50 years, right? It's the cycle that we get to experience the taste of. That's like Shabbat. And then we have Shemitah, and then we have Yovel, like these periods where we get to taste what liberation might feel like. And then also with the Shema that you just brought up with the Shaddai, there's protection, there's God's protection, and there's also the Shema of listening, and the importance of getting to a place of redemption by actually listening to the people around us and what are the needs, not to only work in a type of world where we're taking from each other, but we're actually giving where there's extra to give. And the shin is representative of so much, but that could be one angle to look at it.
And if you look at the hands holding the flagpole of the shin, I don't see any, they seem to be drowning in life, with their hands coming up, and that's the world that we live in. We could drown there with all the tourists that's there, but we still carry that Torah, that shin, that we still carry God within us, and no matter where we go and where we land, we can grow on this earth. Mention doing tikkun olam, having opportunities, education. I love our religion, and I love the art that you have shown. Thank you so much.
Thank you for participating.
Sorry to jump back in, but now that I'm now actually realizing that you mentioned that this is connected to Zohar, I mean, I really see the Sefirot, and the hands at the bottom really could be Shekhinah, right, as the way that the divine interfaces with the earth. And gosh, so much has just unfolded for me in here. And the stars, I mean, they remind me of the holy sparks from the Tzimtzum. I mean, I would love to. I have a million questions.
Now that is what Torah art does. I love that reaction, because for all of us who have been able to witness the creation of these pieces, participate in the creation of them, the rabbis who got to work with the artists that got to work with the rabbis, this is what the entire project was about. To be able to connect to Torah in many different ways and for people to access it. And, you know, at this point, Dvir is going to be speaking soon. We're going to go back into the room to hear him wrap up, but we're starting a new cycle right now of reading the Torah. And I think from this whole year of getting to encounter Torah in new ways, through artwork, it enlivens the experience so much. And just as Torah needs the art, as Esti was showing us, you know, the art is also drawing from the Torah to make it relevant for us today. So thank you all for joining for this entire session, and we'll go back into the main room to hear the final words. And yeah, it's been wonderful to be with all of you this evening. All right.
And thank you.
Perfect.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. If people want to put in the chat anything that they're grateful for, that they got to see tonight or hear, any piece of wisdom, because we were all in different rooms while we wait for other people to join and to get the closing remarks from Dvir. I think it's a great way for us to get tidbits of what was going on in other places, just to be able to share. If you want to put it in the chat, or we can also speak here out loud. I'll just say I am very, very so filled with Torah and art and inspiration. So incredible.
This concludes our presentation. This concludes the color commentary virtual exhibit.
Dvir, can you get out of the share so we can see each other?
Sure, sure.
Oh, I can, yeah.
Thank you, because we don't need this anymore, right?
Right.
I need this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for taking the afternoon or evenings or late evenings. Bria's coming from Israel, and people from all over the world, stretching from the West Coast to all corners of the world. This was called the color commentary because like in a sports broadcast, you have the color commentary, which coats and comes in and interjects in different moments, and you have the play-by-play. And it's in these conversations where we're able to pull out and invoke deeper meaning, that we don't just go into our own modes of play-by-play, reading through the scripture and finding the same rote concepts that we lean on, but it's to try and shake ourselves up into a mode of color commentary, seeing the colors between the lines, seeing the letters dance off of the page, and allowing that to awaken and speak to our souls. this entire presentation could not have been done without hours and hours of beautiful and really pensive thought from each one of our artists, each one of the rabbis who have dedicated months of study into thinking about one parsha. When we think about the play-by-play, it's from one week, all of a sudden we wake up and we're at the next week and we have to continually end up in a cyclical cycle of reading the next points. But by pausing and thinking for months about what are poignant thoughts that could emerge from one section, one sliver of the Torah, and then to allow that meditation to awaken artwork, to allow that meditation to create Divrei Torah, is something that for me has been nothing short of breathtaking to bear witness to. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all of the Amen Institute support team, to Bria Kahana, to Shalhevet Robinson, to Jacob Klein, to Keitra Kahana. Thank you, everyone who has put in hours and hours of work for making this all possible. Throughout the presentations, we also have some of the works that are for sale. You're able to find them at the ameninstitute.org/virtual exhibit. And if any of the pieces that are on for sale you'd like to purchase, we will get you directly in contact with the artists. And the applications are also open for the fellowship next year. They'll be closing at the beginning of December. So if you know anyone, any rabbi or any artist who's interested in partaking in this magnificent work, this beautiful project, please share it with them and let them know about what could be. Because everything that we've seen today is kind of looking backwards at what was. And last year at this time, it was still a moment in all of our minds of what could be. And thinking about everything that we've seen today, it's just really a breathtaking moment to say, wow, what could have been was but a dream, but what could be is continuing to engage in text from a creative lens. And it's been a really beautiful thing to bear witness to. So thank you all for taking the afternoon. Thank you all for sharing your beautiful thoughts, for being present with one another, for building this gorgeous community that's been the house virtually, and in some particular moments where we've been able to see each other in person.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank
Hey,
you, everyone.
Dvir, can we end off with a traditional chazak for the siyum?
Yes, chazak, chazak. Wow, strengthen yourself, strengthens, and let us all be strengthened.
Amen.
Take care.
Amen. And Mazal Tov to Dvir.
Yeah.
Shalhevet.
Kol hakavod.
Shah Tova.
Yeah.
Shah Tova.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
This is so extraordinary. I'm like, I feel like my mind and my heart exploding in like 17 directions I didn't know it could go in. This is so cool. I'm blessed to be here. And I thank you for the blessing of the art and the Torah, and the Torah fused with art and the art fused with Torah. It's so amazing. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Especially for those of us for whom art touches our heart. And, sometimes songs do it, but art, oh God, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Reb Barani, may you have a lot of Yiddish nachas from Dvir and the whole mishpacha. Bis 120.
Kol tov. Take care, everyone. It's not goodbye, it's just au revoir.
Au revoir.
My mother would often say that, au revoir, but not goodbye. להתראות.
להתראות.